What does it mean to be a sovereign being? What does it mean to operate as one and to fully own your agency? And how do we negatively impact both our day-to-day lives and our relationships and our relationship with divinity if we aren't fully owning our sovereignty? And how do we teach our children the importance of this as well? On today's episode, I have a conversation to share with you where my guest and I are going to dive into this topic. And my hope is that you will use it as a springboard by which to develop your own ideas and your own insight about this topic. This is episode 490, Female Sovereignty with McArthur Krishna. Welcome to Better Than Happy, the podcast where we transform our lives by transforming ourselves. My name is Jody Moore. In the decade plus I've been working with clients as a master certified coach, I've helped tens of thousands of people to become empowered. And from empowered, the things that seemed hard become trivial. And the things that seemed impossible become available. And suddenly a whole new world of desire and possibility open up to you. And what do you do with that? Well, that's the question. What will you do? Let's find out. Sometimes listening to a podcast is enough, but sometimes you'll feel inspired to go deeper. If you hear things that speak to you in today's episode, consider it your invitation to a complimentary coaching workshop. On this live interactive Zoom call with me, you'll get a taste of the power of this work when applied in real life. You can participate or be a silent observer, but you have to take a step if you want to truly see change in your life. 2 steps, actually. Head to jodymoore.com/free coaching and register. Then you just have to show up. Your best life is waiting for you. Will you show up for it? jodymoore.com/free coaching. I'll see you there. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of Better Than Happy. I am very excited to introduce you today to McArthur Krishna, if you're not familiar with her, and to share with you a very interesting conversation I had with her recently. McArthur is an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and an author and someone who I met maybe a little over 5 years ago through the Faith Matters Foundation and have really just learned so much from and enjoyed watching her navigate the space that she feels so passionate about, which is helping to bring useful awareness and tools and insight and help us think a little bit deeper about topics within the culture of our religion and the doctrine of our religion around topics like equality for men and women and feminism and the divine feminine and Heavenly Mother. And I've just had a lot of interesting insights in the handful of conversations I've had with McArthur. Recently, she was in town and we went to lunch or dinner. We had a meal. And anyway, she was so fired up about this topic of women becoming sovereign beings. And I said, wait, don't tell me about it yet. Let's get the mics out, let's press record, and let's talk about it when we can capture it for the podcast, because it's a topic that I feel passionate about as well. And McArthur and I have, of course, our own viewpoints and ideas about it, but I'm very excited to share this conversation with you because it's something I just want you to think through as well in your own life. I know that it will have relevance whether you are male or female, or you have sons or daughters. It's just an interesting topic. And as you know, I've sort of been discussing this topic in various ways lately, really wanted to bring McArthur in on this topic. So please enjoy my conversation with McArthur Krishna. All right, McArthur, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. So happy to have you here.
I am delighted to be here. It is always fun to talk about stuff we're passionate about.
Right? And we are passionate today.
And most days.
And most days, but some days more than others. So we'll just leave it at that. Okay, let's just begin with introduction. Will you let everybody know who you are, what your work is about, and just give us a brief intro, please?
Yeah. So generally, I'm known for writing books. I've written, published 20 or so books.
That's a
But,
lot of books,
you
by the
know,
way. You know, I mean, seriously. Anyway, okay, sorry, continue.
well, and honestly, it sounds a little bit funny, but I was writing some of those books when I was living in India and I didn't have access to church. So all of a sudden, I had like 3 extra hours every Sunday available to me. You can get a lot of writing done when you have 3 extra hours, right? So, I mean, if
Wow.
anyone wants to write a book, I'm just saying that's an
Maybe
option,
move to India.
right? I recommend it.
Would
And
you
our
mind
books,
sharing? Because when you and I were together last, you shared with me a little bit about just your experience of being a student at BYU and ending up living in India for a little bit. Are you comfortable sharing that? I just think it's so fascinating.
so I was part of a clan that was raised on the BYU fight song. And so like Saturday mornings, my mom would come into our bedroom and like literally sing, "Rise and shout, it's time to do your chores," right? Like it was just baked in to who we were gonna
Cougars
be.
through and through.
Cougars. Yeah, exactly. I don't know when this is gonna air, but they're playing the Utes soon, and we're just saying we have some loyalty here, right?
Okay.
So that was completely baked in. And at the same time, my mom also said, when you go to BYU, you'll really find your people, which was both 100% true and 100% not true, right?
Mhm.
As most motherly advice is, now that I'm a mother and I know how we hand that out, right? And it is true that I found incredible women who are my tribe, who are friends to this day, who've made me who I am. I mean, like all of the most abundant richness you can imagine with those women. And it made me realize that being a member of our church actually meant there was way more diversity than what I had realized. That there were, almost 30,000 people who go to BYU, and we didn't all agree. We didn't all
Mm.
agree on everything that was being talked about and everything that was being put forward. And instead of that being something to kind of mourn or feel nervous about, that was really truly something to celebrate. That I really think that there's richness in weaving together different perspectives. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, there's a whole bunch of people I found who are quote unquote not my tribe, right? And at the same time, I've always loved how you discuss that we're the body of Christ and that we make up the church and that you and I can't say to a foot, I have no need of thee. Right.
Mm.
And so having a really wide perspective is what made me realize that even within my own faith, right, even among a very narrow, you'd think kind of a narrow demographic, like of a certain age, mostly white, mostly US, that those sorts of very narrow demographics, there's actually a really wide angle on the world, right?
Mm.
And after graduation, I was not married, much to my mother's poking her plan, right? That I popped that bubble,
What? What
right?
went wrong?
This was the plan,
That's
right?
why you go to BYU.
Yep. And my mom had 100% schemed it, right? But I became a young professional in a completely different scene in Washington, D.C., where all of a sudden you saw people from all over the world. And my ward was the most diverse I've ever been in, both in race and politics and age. And it was incredible. It was, to this
Mm.
day, I think of that congregation with absolute like humility and such gratitude. We had lots of people who worked on Capitol Hill. And so we had somebody who was the chief of staff to the most conservative Republican, and someone else who was a speechwriter for Hillary Clinton was like the executive secretary. And
Fun.
right, it was amazing
Mhm.
because we learned that we could think really differently about how to solve the world's problems, but we had respect for each other and that we are brothers and sisters in Christ. And it
Mm.
was a very solid lesson. I was in that ward for 12 years, and it was a very solid lesson and a model for what can be possible. I ran a business, I owned a business with some partners, and I went to India and had a very compelling spiritual experience that India was going to be significant in my life. But it still took, let me think, maybe another 10 years for that to play out. I had thought India was going to be significant because I was dating the guy that, you know, brought me to India. And then when that didn't work out, I was like, wait, God, I cannot cede an entire subcontinent to like the ending of a relationship. Like I claim this subcontinent for myself. And so I started going to India about once a year because I had this really strong spiritual feeling that it was going to be significant. And I didn't want it to be tied to this relationship. Right.
Mm.
It's like a friend of mine who always wanted her husband to play the guitar because her father had played the guitar. And all of a sudden she realized one day that she could take
She
guitar
could play the
lessons.
guitar.
Right? Exactly. Hey, right?
So, yeah, I mean,
Yes.
it's an interesting just point you make about, we do believe in getting spiritual, personal revelation or inspiration or whatever you want to call it, but the interpretation of that is always up for grabs, I guess you could
Right?
say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had maybe 2 instances in my entire life where, like, the interpretation was not up for grabs.
Mm.
And one of those was actually marry my husband, which I have been forever grateful for that clarity. Anyway, so I started going to India once a year. I met my husband there. I had an incredibly spiritual experience. It still took me about a year to actually, like, embrace God's will on this. Like, I literally kept feeling like I was going along my path, and then I would get too scared of the path, or I thought the path was crazy, or I thought God was crazy for trusting me, and so, like, I had all sorts of quibbles with this path.
Mm.
And I kept feeling God, like, picking me up and putting me back on the path and back on the path and back on the path. And finally, I prayed about, like, okay, is this person my husband? Because it's, like, time to fish or cut bait. The most clear, overwhelming, powerful answer to prayer I've ever had. There's no quibbling. I could have quibbled all along the way with all the other, maybe this, maybe this, maybe this is just a learning opportunity, right? Like all the things. And then this was just clear. Like, nope, this is who you are to marry. And that set me on the path of moving to India. And frankly, I find God's paths both baffling and more abundant than what I come up with on my own. And I have a good imagination,
Mm.
but it has been astounding to me that when I turn my path over to God, the myriad of things that could come that I never dreamt of.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. I just love hearing people's personal stories, and I think you have such an interesting one. A lot of your work in recent years, and a lot of, I know, your writing and teaching has centered around the topics Heavenly Mother, uplifting women's roles and power in the church, authority in the church. And recently, I know you've become really excited about this topic of sovereignty for women.
Yes.
So
Yes.
let's just dive in. I love, you're kind of like me, I feel like, where you get a topic that you're passionate about it. And so I want you to present it to us in the way that makes the most sense to you. And then I'll have
Sure.
tons of questions and comments, I'm sure.
I would expect no less. So, the reason I think sovereignty is so important is
And wait,
twofold.
can you define what you mean by sovereignty, first of all?
Yes.
Sorry.
So, sovereignty is, I'm going to use women because that's what I work on, but this is obviously true for women and men both. A sovereign woman is a person who trusts herself, knows she can turn to God to get personal revelation, and trusts that personal revelation no matter what comes at her. That is sovereign. You
Okay.
know you can turn to God and you can trust what you get,
Okay.
right? And the reason I think this is so important for women of the LDS church is twofold. One is we came to this earth life to become gods, to learn how to become gods. And that means that we have to learn how to be like pro level agencies, like agents to act. We have to have agency. If you're not being a sovereign person, then you're not flexing and growing and stretching into your agency at your fullest potential. So, one, I think it's the whole purpose. I think agency and being a sovereign, learning to be like God is the most important thing we can do in this life. One.
I agree with you. Can I, for just a minute before we move on from agency, I don't know if it's just innate within us or if it's because, before we all were sent here to earth, we all chose Christ's plan, which included agency. That was a big differentiator between
Yep.
our
Yep.
options, right? But I notice that we fiercely protect our agency even unconsciously. It seems to be innate. So it's the toddler realizing that they are capable of getting in the car by themselves and suddenly having a tantrum when you don't wait, and we don't want to wait because it takes so much longer for them to climb in the car than for us to put them in. But they've realized now, wait, I can do this and I want to do
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
And even from a very young age. And then it's the teenager pushing back on, don't tell me what to do. And then it's all of us as adults not wanting to be told that we have to or that we can't. And I just
Mhm.
notice it seems to be, even though, to your point, sometimes we lose touch with our sovereignty, or maybe we never had it and we need to develop it stronger. I do think that we all understand on some innate level how important that agency is.
100%. I think it's an innate godly need. Like
Yeah.
if we're to become like God is obviously like the most sovereign beings, right? Our heavenly parents can
Mhm.
clearly function with their own power, right?
Right,
And so
right.
to me, that's almost the definition of God is to be a sovereign being. And so if we're
Yeah.
becoming like God, this is a skill set that we need to grow, develop, nurture, practice for the first time, whatever stage. And in my mind, it's not what stage you're at on this kind of sovereign journey, it's
Okay.
the orientation. I
Mm.
want to be a sovereign being. I feel this is vital to development. What does that look like where I am now? And what does
Okay.
that look like tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day? Right? Because
Mm.
this is where people are in different places on this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So the point number 2 about why this is so important
Yeah.
for LDS women specifically, because again, it's important for both men and women, but to talk about the conversation today, I'm going to aim towards women.
Yeah.
The reason I think it's so important for LDS women specifically is because we were actually trained to give up our sovereignty. We were taught to defer our sovereignty. For example, it has been fairly recent in my adult life that the temple ceremony changed and that I go directly to God instead of having a mediated relationship to God. So the way it used to be is a woman would go to her husband, a husband would go to God. And that's changed.
Okay.
But it meant for most of my adult life, I was taught that my relationship to God was mediated. A
Mm.
mediated relationship to God is not a sovereign relationship with God. So there's absolutely nothing wrong, of course, with having wisdom in your life, wisdom from manuals, wisdom from prophets, wisdom from local leaders, wisdom from friends, from parents. Like, I'm not saying there's not contributions to our decision making, but to be a sovereign being, you have to be able to hold back someone else's opinion if you know you're on the Lord's errand, if
Mm.
you know that you are aligned with God. So sovereignty is not, for an LDS person, is not external to God, right? This is aligning yourself with God and trusting that alignment. So I can give you a great story about this. Ardith Cap was the general young women's president, right? So president of all the young women in the church. For
Mhm.
those of you who don't, I mean, those of us who are our age, we would know Ardith, right? Like she was the
Right.
person who created personal progress and was meaningful in talking to women about their divine worth. Okay. For another generation, they may not even know this name. But there is a story both that I listened to on the Magnify podcast and in her biography, her autobiography, that talks about this moment where she was asleep in bed, woke up, had this incredible, powerful feeling that God needed her to write something. So she hops out of bed, starts to write and write and write. And she says that she just felt like she was channeling God through her arm to her pen, like getting it down. She was 100% clear that this was divine revelation. She goes in to meet with the 70 that the General Young Women's Presidency reported to, and she starts saying, like, this is what happened. This is what my experience was. And he says, we're not going to do that. And she brings it up every meeting that they have every month. And finally, after a few months, he says, quit bringing this up. We're not going to do this. Okay, so here's this person who's 100% clear that this has arrived to her from God, but she's being told that this is not what's going to happen. What do you do in that moment? Do you trust your sovereignty? Do you think, oh, maybe I got it wrong? Do you you start to question, like, what happens there? I don't know. She doesn't describe, but this is one of my questions.
Mm.
However, I don't know what she thought, but I know what she did.
Okay.
Her next meeting with President Monson, who I think at that time was not president, I think he's one of the counselors, said, anything else you'd like to share with us, Ardith, after, they had their meeting? She said, as a matter of fact, there is. And she slid across that pamphlet and said, here's how this came to be, and tells them the whole story about being inspired. Within 6 months, that pamphlet was distributed worldwide.
Mm. What's the lesson we should take from this?
Exactly. If you are clear you're on the Lord's errand,
Mhm.
that was a sovereign being.
Mhm.
She knew she was on the Lord's errand. She knew she was aligned and she did not hesitate. She held to her sovereignty until she'd accomplished what the Lord had told her to accomplish. To me, this is just incredible,
Mhm.
right?
That is incredible, especially like you said, this was 30, 40 years ago, right?
Right. And I think the power in this is we have to seek God's alignment. That's not easy, right? Making sure you're in tune is not an easy exercise. That's something to cultivate daily, right? To foster that relationship and foster that fine tuning. And most of us don't have utter clarity on all of our answers. We're not always sure we're in alignment,
Yeah.
right? I think that's where the trick is. But
Yeah.
I think when we are clear to have the moral courage to say, I'm a sovereign being and I will continue on this path. So we're just releasing a book called Change Makers because I think there's a time when women are concerned right now about whether or not their voices matter in our faith. And so we had the idea that we should turn to history and kind of see, even recent history, modern history. The story of Ardith is in that book. But we wanted to collect this selection of stories that would really hold up the power of what it means to be a sovereign woman and how when you have this alignment with God, then you can make a change in this world, even when you hit bumps and roadblocks and structures that are not in favor of whatever sort of alignment you know you're carrying.
And what I love about that story is I feel like a lot of times we think like, oh, God told me to marry this man or move to this city or take this job or in this situation, I received this wisdom and guidance.
Mhm.
So therefore, it should all play out easily, right? Like, what is it? How is it that God told me to move here and I'm so unhappy here? I'm not making friends here. My kids aren't doing well here, or I'm struggling in my marriage, or how could it be?
Yeah.
Surely God's only going to tell us to do things that are going to lead to a path that is smooth and easy and simple, right? And I
Yeah.
love in this example, first of all, that she was told no over and over again, it sounds like, and still just continued to find the right opportunity to bring it up again.
Yep.
And so sometimes it's persistence, right? It's like, yeah, I work with a lot of coaches. We're like, I felt really inspired to start a coaching business. I help people, but it's not working yet. I'm like, feeling inspired and having everything go smoothly are not necessarily
Not the same
the
thing at
same.
all. I'll I'm about to be confessional. That's why I just
Okay,
paused and
good.
stumbled. I'm like, uh-oh. About to be confessional. This is
We
what
want to
Jody
hear
does to you. Jody makes you confess,
it.
right? I was a little grouchy at God. That's an understatement because this courtship and decision-making process was so hard. It was so hard. I felt like lacerating, like a mind that was getting lacerated because the cognitive dissonance was so real. And my
Yeah.
husband's lovely, so this is not a commentary on him at all, right? This is about process. So I was complaining, I was praying, and I was rah, rah, rah. And I've always thought it's really good to be authentic in my prayers because God knows who I am anyway. And so, like, I should not try to hide that I'm patient or humble or whatever because, like, God knows, like, what I'm bringing to the table, right?
Mhm.
So I'm very authentic in my prayers. So I was rah, rah, rahing. And all of a sudden, I got this absolute, like, it was almost like I got a hand put on my head,
Mm.
like a calming, like, child. And then it came into my mind yes, I could have done it smoother and you would have gotten him, right? You would have married your husband. But this way, the hard, scrabbly, demanding, stretching, wrenching way, this way you got him and me.
Mm.
Capital M, capital E, like me.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, if what we're supposed to be doing in this life is to become godlike and to develop a relationship with our Savior and with our heavenly parents, then being put in a situation that demanded my dependence on them was the point. Like that was moving me a step closer on this journey. And it
Yeah.
was so much wisdom for me that, like, just because I was on the Lord's path, it was not going to be smooth, but it meant that I needed the Lord, right?
Yeah.
If the
That's
path would
right.
have been smooth and easy, I would have been like, thanks, thanks, I got it, right? But
So
like,
true.
I needed God. And I think that has given me a lot of peace when that path got harder. I mean, I moved to India and things didn't smooth out, right? I mean, it got harder in different ways. And
Yeah.
so I think this moment of peace has carried me a long way. The point of all this is to become like them, to be with them. I mean, Elder Oak says our theology begins with heavenly parents. Our highest aspiration is to be like them, right? And so I think in that understanding, having this turning to them, it is the point.
It is the
It-
point. Yeah. And who we become in the process of that, right? To your point, to become more like them. I'm thinking too about just our listeners, and this idea of sovereignty, I think will really resonate with everyone. For me, the questions that are coming up are things like, well, how do I know in what areas I need to work on this? What does it look like that might, and obviously we're not trying to say it's a checkbox, like
Yeah, yeah.
congratulations, you're done or you're not, but just can
You
you
get a
give us
crown. You
examples?
have been anointed sovereign, right?
You are now a sovereign woman.
Exactly.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we're
Mhm.
not saying that, but I think we all have blind spots. I know I have plenty of blind spots where I
For
think like, no,
sure.
I'm confident, I'm independent, I value myself as a woman. But what
Yep.
are some things maybe I'm not considering or that other people, our listeners may not be considering
You know
that we
what's so
should
great is
what?
whenever I have questions like this, because I had the same question, whenever I have questions like this, I dig into it and then I end up with publishing a book, right? Because like
Good. We're going to give you your next
this is
book right
this is
now.
how I process. Well, so we've done one. It's called In the Image of Our Heavenly Parents
Oh, that's right.
and How to Create a More Divine Marriage, right?
I love it. It's such a
And
good book.
I had this exact question of how do I become divine in my marriage? How to become a sovereign being in my marriage? Because like I'm not Artist Cap. I'm not in the position to exercise my
Right.
sovereignty in that way. So in my day-to-day life, I'm married,
Yeah.
I have children. Like in my day-to-day life, how do I
Yeah.
show up as a sovereign being? And what was amazing is we were working with 4 different LDS therapists, and they laid down ways that husbands and wives can function as equal partners. Because we know from the Gospel Topics essay that Elder Renlund declared in General Conference April 2022 that this is our doctrine on Heavenly Mother. And it says in that essay that Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother work together, that's a direct quote, for the salvation of the children, side by side. And that was the pattern. So I thought, okay, if the pattern is to be side by side, if the pattern is to work together, what does this look like in my day-to-day marriage? And when I started to talk, but I know nothing about this. So I got a hold of LDS therapists to say, tell me about this. And so Jennifer Finlinson Fife is one of them, Julie Hanks and Jeff Stewart and Ty Mansfield. And so we had 2 women and 2 men who came together to write this book about what does it mean, basically to be a sovereign being in your marriage, how to be an equal partner. And it was fascinating because I'm like you. I just assume like I got this. I believe in women. I talk about this all the
Mhm.
time, right?
Mhm.
This is my thing.
Right.
And I dug into their 12 different points because we basically set it up like once a month. Like there's one point to work on every month, like a workbook. And they had
Okay.
12 points of how to kind of check yourself against this model. And I realized 2 of the 10, I was not showing up as an equal partner or a sovereign being. And it
Mm.
was fascinating because I had just assumed that I was check, check, I got this, right? That this is, I can worry about other things, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, it was super interesting to realize. And so one of those was soul development. So when I owned my own business, we invested in lots of people's professional development. We had a professional development budget. People would go out, they'd learn something, they'd come back and teach the rest of us. We 100% invested in people's growth. And there's money and resources behind that. When I had young children and stepped away from that job because I moved to India, all of a sudden I realized that my husband was continuing that investment in his career, but that I had not, right? And I thought,
Right.
this is fascinating. So I started to talk to women about soul investment, soul development. And it was the stories I got back, the reasons I got back were fascinating. Well, I'd like to go do a master's, but there's no return on investment, right? Like my family can't afford for me to like go to school and learn something if I'm not going to make more money at this, right? And someone else just said, I don't have time. I have a bunch of kids. And so I was watching all these women list all of these reasons they couldn't invest in their souls. And it was fascinating to me because the example I always use is like me sitting on the sidelines at a soccer game and being like, I invest in my kid soccer practice and cleats and fees and uniforms and camp chairs and like rain or shine. Like I am there. And it's not because I expect her to go pro. It's because I know it's good for her soul. Right.
Yes. I'm such a huge believer in that. It's largely what motivated me to focus on LDS women in my coaching business,
Yeah.
especially stay-at-home moms, right? I'm like you. I came from the corporate world. I saw how helpful it is to go hear a motivational speaker every now and then, to go to a development type
Yep.
of conference or things. And I'm
Yep.
like, when you're at home raising kids, you're not getting that unless you seek it out. And we put exactly like you said, time, money, effort into our kids'
Family
sports
support.
and camps. And it's not like once you reach adulthood. I think that a lot of us justify that with like, well, they're growing and developing, and this is such an important time while they're developing their self concept and their brains are still forming. And I'm like, that doesn't end though. That's what this
Exactly.
whole life is. Like, yes, your brain
Exactly.
is changing. There's some different biological things happening with children, but
Yeah.
every one of us needs, even if you love where you're at and you feel confident and great and you don't really have an interest in getting a master's degree, that's fine. But stagnation is not
Yep.
actually an option. We're either improving or declining.
Well, and you think about the story we know from the scriptures with the talents. What
Mm,
happened to the person who buried their talents? Right? And
yeah,
so a
that's
friend of
right.
mine is the mother to 9 children, and she said, "I have mother muscles like out the wazoo, but the talents I was given, God-given talents of singing, dancing, theater, art," she said, "I haven't exercised those in 20 years. I can feel that they've atrophied. I can feel that they've
Right.
disappeared." And so this is not about going to get a master's. This is about looking around your life and saying, what are the things that feel like me? What are the things that give me energy and spark and joy? What is just of interest to me? Like
Mhm.
your interest is valid enough just to say,
That's
I'm
right.
interested in this.
Yes.
Right?
And I love that you call it soul development because that can just include so many things. And you don't
Absolutely.
have to justify it. You can just be like, I don't know, it just speaks to my soul.
Exactly. So she started Thursday nights became her soul development night, and she'd round up all
Nice.
the kids, pick them all up. 4 o'clock, she'd literally shut the door to her room, and she had Thursday nights to herself. She had 6 hours between 4
Mm.
p.m. and 10 p.m. And everybody on the other side of that door, her husband, the big kids, handled homework and dinner and bedtimes and all the things. And her family supported her soul development. And this is what I think is really, really important. You shouldn't do soul development with this idea that, like, my husband and children should not be impacted by this. They should not know there's anything amiss in this. I'll make 50 trillion, freezer meals to make sure that they're not inconvenienced by my soul development.
Like,
Teaching your
no.
children it's worth inconveniencing them for other people's soul development is a really important lesson.
That's right. That's right. Amen. I love that one.
Doesn't matter what it is. It is if you want a nap is immediately valid if that's what your soul needs, right?
Yeah. I just think that's so important. And I do find maybe it's because I'm getting older, but I find I've gotten really good at just building that into my routine. And sometimes there's something big or new that I want to try or learn or et
Yep.
cetera. But I have a lot of things that I do just because I need it to just even
Mhm.
maintain my
Yep.
connection with myself, personal
Yep.
care, maybe we call it. I don't know. To the extent that like
Soul investment.
soul investment, that when it's my birthday or something, and I think it's fine if you want a big celebration on your birthday, that's cool too. But people are always like, let's do something. I just had a birthday, right? So people are like, what do you want to do for your birthday? And I'm like, honestly, I feel like I celebrate me all year. I really do. I take such good care of myself. I connect with myself. I don't need anything. I
I
mean, like,
love
yeah,
that.
let's go to lunch or whatever, but I feel so complete
Mhm.
already that any
Mm.
of that stuff is just extra and nice, and I appreciate it when
Yep.
people are kind, but I don't need it like I used to
Yeah.
be hanging on waiting for when it was gonna be my turn and have my break or my
Right.
celebration.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right, that it has to be baked in. And that this
Yeah.
is I think immediately women fall prey to thinking they're being selfish, right? That anything that requires family, budget, time, inconvenience, somehow prioritizing their own soul, immediately women feel like selfish, right? Like, cannot do
Mhm.
that. And I
Mhm.
want to really, really eradicate that because if we know we're on this earth life to become like God, then we know that our soul has to be invested in. There's a gap between us and God. And if we're trying to grow towards that gap to be your best divine self, takes investment. And
Yeah.
so I want to make sure that people don't feel this idea that is in any way a self-absorbed or a selfish moment, but to say I would invest in my soul the same way I would invest in any of my children's or any of my friends, souls, and that our soul has worth.
Yeah.
This really real understanding that we have divine worth means our souls are worth that investment.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up that word because that is the word that comes up a lot, selfish. I don't wanna be selfish. Isn't it selfish? And there's lots of ways you can define that word, I guess. But sometimes when I'm coaching, I was just coaching a woman recently who said that, whatever it was she's wanting to pursue, and she said, "But it feels selfish. Isn't that selfish?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, maybe it's okay." Like if by selfish you mean other people in my family might have to sacrifice while I go spend time or resources on this thing, then
Yeah.
I actually think that is the point. I think it's
Yeah.
okay. I think it, and at the same time, we have, doctrine or counsel anyway around like what brings us the most joy is serving and giving and not being self-centered and self-focused. But here's what I think. It kind of goes back to like basic rational self-interest theory, which says that actually every one of us is all day long constantly doing what we think will serve us best. We're trying to maximize benefits, minimize costs, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's why like when people vote, we give them the I voted sticker to take the time to go do it and figure it out and deal with it. Like, but if you have
Yeah.
a sticker and then people see and think you're a good citizen, you can feel good about yourself. It's like one more benefit,
Right.
even if you
Right.
think your vote doesn't count, right? So, but my whole point in this is like, okay, but what we're saying is think about and consider and do what you want to do. The truth is also what I want as a mother is to show up for my children and take care of them and my
Absolutely.
husband and people I love and sacrifice for them sometimes. Go sit in the rain at the soccer game so that they see that I support them. Like I do actually want those things too. I
Yeah.
don't just want to go to yoga and go shopping, like that's not
Well,
the
and I think there's a big difference between self-centered, which means all decisions are made from you are
me
the
at the center of
right,
the
the entire
universe.
universe, exactly.
Yeah.
But to say, so what we talk about to our kids all the time is that our family is a system and that we all need to be contributing members of the system, right?
Mm.
So this may be a terrible statement for people who are listening. I could care less what my kids' rooms look like. Like if you want to live in squalor, that's 100% your choice. Like I'm
Mhm.
not going to fuss at you or hurt our relationship by worrying about this. Like that's your choice. However, it's not negotiable that your job is to unload the dishwasher,
Mm.
right? Like this is your contribution to the family. And then
Mhm.
I'll say to them things like, I do this and this and this for you, not because I need a medal for it, but because we need awareness, right? Like children are
Yeah.
not fully aware of all the things that are happening for them or around them or on their behalf. So when I say to my 9-year-old recently, like, these are the things I'm doing for you, but this means I need to do this errand and you need to come with me. And I'd even really appreciate if you came with me happily. You don't
Mm.
have to be happy when you come, but like, you're going to come because this is the balance, right? I'm doing this for
Yeah.
you and this for me, and this is what needs to happen. And I
Mhm.
think teaching kids the needs in a system need to be balanced is actually vital. It's not just vital
Mhm.
for our families, it's vital for our communities and for our nation and for our world, right?
Mhm.
Like we have a lot of resources in this world. How are we going to balance the needs of the world? And so I
Right.
think teaching kids this, that a mother's soul is also worth investment, should just be so baked into them that it's not even a thing, right? So
Yeah.
then they grow up and your daughters will be like, well, my soul's worth investment because my mother modeled this. And sons
Yeah.
will be like, oh, my wife's soul's worth investment because my mother modeled this, right?
Mhm.
And so we have this opportunity to start a virtuous cycle by having our families participate in our soul development.
I love that so much. What do you say to someone who's like, "Yeah, my spouse doesn't see it that way?" There is shockingly to me still a lot of old school thinking about what the woman's role is, or a lot of I go to work all day and earn money. And so this is your job. My job is to make the money. Your job is to do this. What do you say if your spouse or your family isn't supportive?
Well, it depends where on the spectrum you feel like being in your sovereign journey. So, not investing is not an option. So that like that's off the table. So then it's just a matter of like, well, kids are at school and you're at work, so I'm going to take 9 to 5 on Tuesdays to
Mhm.
do my soul development whether or not you approve of it. Like
Mm.
that's okay. It's non-negotiable to say that everyone in a family system needs soul development. How you go about that, you could go all the way to be like, well, it is your job to make the money, but it's also your job in a covenant relationship. You have covenanted to be with me and to us both be on the journey of this life developmental path. Part of that covenant is supporting my soul development, right? This is not about who earns money or who stays home. This is about that we, as a couple, have covenanted to become like gods together.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, there's like valid arguments you could make, I think, on either side of it. And I think I know what you're saying and what we both feel is that these are complicated personal. I asked you a really tough question and asked you to answer it for all different situations.
All women.
I know. In all situations, what's the right answer, McArthur? I mean, soul
How you
development,
get there is different.
how you navigate it, right? Sometimes it is pointing that out. Like you said, this is part of a covenant relationship. This is actually part of our doctrine, even. I think to make sure, just I want to say to anybody listening that you get some support and help and that you talk through it with a therapist or a coach or a friend or a sister or somebody who can help you get some perspective on it. Cause I think it's tricky. Like you said at the very beginning, yeah, if you're 100% certain God is channeling this through my arm and my pen onto the page, okay, but what if you're not? What if you kind of think that, but maybe this is just your own idea and maybe you are being selfish and like there's just so much noise in our heads.
Yep. So I can tell you my own personal experience with this.
Yeah, please.
I had been interested in taking this stone sculpture class. Well, I'd been interested in taking an art class. I mean, I'm an artist. I've had things hang in galleries. One of my pieces was in the Church History Museum in their last show, but it's not like this is my profession, right? I do that for joy. And so I wanted to take an art class for joy. Can you imagine what an insane motivation, right?
How selfish.
How selfish. Exactly. And I started looking around, and honestly, all the classes I was looking at were too expensive. Like I was adding it up and I was like, I just can't justify that, and like yada yada. And then this stone sculpture class fell in my lap. And for XYZ reasons, it was going to be half the price of what it normally was. And so like I mustered my courage and said, okay, I can do this. And then I ran into the logistics of like, okay, but what am I going to do with my kids when I'm in a stone sculpture class, right? During the summer. And this is exactly what you were just saying. You turn to your community. And I was talking with my sister about like how I was going to manage this. And she just said, pick me. I'll come. I'll be your nanny. And so she came and to the location of my class and brought her 3 kids and my kid with her. And she was the best darn nanny you've ever seen, right? She took their kids on great adventures and did art classes with them. And like, I mean, it was just such an incredible, I'm going to cry. It was such an incredible gift from a sister, right? To be like, I see that this joyful thing is on your horizon, but you may not be able to pull it off without some assistance. I will be that person.
So good. I'm going to share a story too. So when I, 11 years ago, discovered coaching and all the tools that I teach now, and they had transformed me so much. And I was also going through a strange time in my career where I'd been laid off and I was like, am I going to stay home with the kids or get another job or what am I going to do? And this life coach training suddenly I discovered, and it was a lot of money. And this is one of the things that in hindsight, I am so glad I did it this way, but I don't know where I got the wisdom to do it. But it was me practicing being a sovereign woman, right? It was like my husband and I make decisions about this amount of money, we would make it together, right?
Yep.
And so at the same time, I didn't know if I was going to go start a business and make back this money. I actually didn't have that intention. I just, like you said, was like, I'm kind of lost and struggling. And this is one thing that I get excited about and I feel pulled towards. I need to go do it. And it's a lot of money. But what I did that I'm so glad I did was before I even approached my husband with the conversation, I got really clear myself about, is this the right thing for me to do? Because I know if I go to him and I'm like, I kind of want to do this thing and I'm not sure if I should. I mean, it's a lot of money, but I think it would be good for me. And I don't know. What do you think? Usually he's like, I don't know if you need that. I mean, don't you think you could get this by listening to a podcast or whatever, right? Which is totally understandable too. It's not because he doesn't support me or doesn't think that I should. My husband's very supportive of soul development, but in the end, my money and his money, we share money. So it would make sense that he's going to be hesitant. But what I did is I just allowed myself, like you said, to make the decision. This is the right thing for me, not because I'm going to go make money with it, just because I want it and I need it. And and it's okay to want things, even expensive things. So then I could go to him and say, I want to do this thing. And it kind of sounds crazy and it's really expensive. And I hope you'll support, and I'm going to figure it out one way or another. I hope you're supportive of the idea, but if you're not, I want to hear your opinion. I am open to what you think, but I feel called and pulled in this direction.
I mean, it's clarity and it's also a really strong anchoring that your soul is worth development. Your
That's
soul
right.
is worth investment.
That's
And I
right.
think, and soul development does not have to be about money. Like I said, my friend just does
Right.
Thursday nights, right? Like that's not about money. So this is not
Right.
about, when we talk about investment, I mean, sometimes I can simply equate to money,
Yeah.
but it can also equate to just time and
That's right.
energy and all, all of the other things. But I think that kind of really strong anchor belief. So we were taught, if you grew up in the Young Women's Program, that we have divine worth. Have we really rolled that into our souls? Is that really something we believe? That if we have divine worth, that means we are worth investing in.
Hmm.
We are worth those steps to grow and develop. Our joy is worth, right?
Yeah.
And I think we have this concept that to be a good parent, or especially a good mother, is equates to martyrdom, right?
Right. Right.
If you're being good at this, you're divine yourself. You're taking the smallest piece of pie. You're eating last. You are like your needs are ranked last. And this is, I think, this is not a last shall be first kind of model. That is not what we're talking about, right? This is literally implying that there's some sort of virtue in saying you're not of worth. That's
Hmm.
what we have to be really careful of. There's
Yeah.
no virtue in saying my soul is not worth investing in.
That's right. I've been using this example lately of like, the first great commandment is to love God and then love thy neighbor as thyself.
As myself.
I'm like, well, I personally don't think we're capable of loving others more than we love ourselves. And
Yeah.
when we don't value ourselves, we can't fully value anyone else. But even if we take the first commandment to love God, right? We are God's creations. So
Yes.
I don't know anybody that is a big Elon Musk fan that says they hate Teslas and Cybertrucks. Like, if you love Elon Musk, you like Teslas
The
and
creation,
Cybertrucks.
right?
I love Taylor Swift because I love all the music she's created. Like,
Hmm.
how do you love God if not by loving all of God's creations,
Right.
including you?
And believing God, because
Yeah.
God said we are here to become like them, right?
Hmm.
And so if we're believing God, then we have to look around and be like, okay, what does that require then? Right. And self-negation is not how you become abundant, right?
Hmm.
And so having this stretch of abundance and to become godlike. And again, that doesn't mean that we don't serve and be kind and all of the things. It just means that we value our souls as we would value our neighbors, right? As
Yeah.
we would value our child's. But I think, to me, a day-to-day sovereignty crops up all the time in how we make decisions. And I think your point to clarity on something big, like I'm going to go do coaching and this is a big investment, is something that can crop up. But I think it's day-to-day decisions that also crop up in our sovereignty. And so what is our relationship with our family? What is our relationship with our neighbors? What is our relationship with the church?
Hmm.
Right. And so to say that we are family centered, church supported, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think understanding that even when I make decisions about what to do with my family, that that is my sovereign choice, right? And
Okay.
trusting that I have the stewardship in that choice,
Yeah.
right? And so there might be times when, because here's the catch, of course, everybody's a sovereign being.
Right.
And my sovereign beingness might bump into your sovereign beingness, right? We have different
Right.
opinions about who to do things or who to vote for or how the world should look, right? But I think if we recognize that there's this tension between us making sovereign being decisions and living in community, that my sovereign rights, for example, don't take over someone else's sovereign rights. So,
Mm.
for example, I get to decide what books my children read. That is my sovereign right as a parent to make that decision. It is nobody else's decision, right?
Right.
Not the
Right.
government's, not a nonprofits, not Moms for Liberty. It
Right.
is my decision about what books my children read. And at
Yeah.
the same time, that doesn't mean I have a right to say what your children read, right?
Right. That's
And
right.
so understanding where that line is between being sovereign and living in community, but also trusting that if we've been given the mantle of responsibility for just ourselves, I mean, this is true if you are single and not married, anything, that we have the right to make decisions that work for us. And so, for example, when I lived in India, I lived a plane ride away from church, right? Like for the first time in my life, I had been one of these people. I mean, absolutely, when I was growing up, I went to church every Sunday. And then even when I was in college, I had this very strict rule for myself that if I was out dancing late on Saturday night and I fell asleep in church on Sunday, I was grounded the next weekend. Like I would ground myself,
I love it.
right? I had the right to expect better of myself. But all of a sudden, I'm in India where I can't get to church every week,
Mhm.
right? What am I going to do as my own sovereign being, right? Does that mean how do I handle my time? How do I handle my resources? And so choosing that we were going to invest in a plane ticket once a month so I could go to church was a big deal in my family, right? Like, I'm going to make this commitment. And then what I did with those other Sundays, it was super interesting to me because the model, again, that I'd always followed and that I've been given was you go to church every Sunday. And so when all of a sudden that model was no longer applicable in my life, no longer even possible in my life, I had to come up as a sovereign being. I had to come up with a new way of doing things,
Mm.
right? To say, okay, what serves me and my spiritual needs and what serves my family? And I think this is something that we regularly do. We just don't quite understand we're doing it.
Mhm.
So, for instance, Diwali just passed. It's an Indian celebration of light. It's like the equivalent in scale to like Christmas if you're a Christian. And my husband was a little bit like, but we're doing Diwali differently than we do it in India. And I was like, exactly, like redoing traditions as you become an adult or as you move places in the world, you have to figure out how to do traditions. Does my Christmas look exactly the way my parents' Christmas looked? No. Some, yes, because my mom was brilliant. She has all sorts of great ideas about culture creation. Like
Mhm.
some of the traditions I've carried from her, and some traditions I've had to make up or change or wiggle. And so, like, making up traditions is one way we're sovereign beings. We look at our life and what our needs are, and we decide, I can take what's been given to me and I can make it into what works for me. And
Mhm.
I think this should be true of everything for how we set up what our school looks like. Some women have decided and men have decided that they want to homeschool children, right? They've looked at the system and said, I want to do this another way. Some people look at how church does things and say, I want to do this another way. Some people look at their traditions around Christmas or holidays and say, I'm going to do this another way. So part of being a sovereign being is these like regular choices about how to set up your life and trusting that you can make wise decisions. Or if they're not wise, as it turns out, you can adjust, right? You can
Yeah.
change things. This is a work in progress. But I think that the traditions is a good example because it's something that we like kind of hold dear to and we get attached
Mhm.
to without actually exercising and evaluating it from the lens of being a sovereign being. What do I actually care about? I mean, I have one friend who doesn't even she doesn't even put up a Christmas tree. She could care less about Christmas decorations and holidays and whatever. And she and her family leave the country on Christmas. She's like, I have done the math. What I've saved on Christmas presents is the equivalent to like going to XYZ place, right?
Yeah.
And so, but she had to really be a sovereign being to look at all of the accoutrements that come with celebrating the Christmas,
Yeah.
all of the pumpkin spice, I mean, like, all the things, and say, is this really what is serving me? And I think that's what it is to be a sovereign being is to look at the things that are handed to you in whatever form they come in and say, does this serve me? What do I want my life to look like? Who do I want to be? And I think those kind of questions mean that you can evaluate. I mean, literally everything you're handed, the relationships, the traditions, the your faith, like all things can be evaluated to is this serving becoming the person I think my heavenly parents want me to be?
And what I love about it is it requires an evolution of ourselves to be able to trust in ourselves, to give ourselves the permission to make those decisions that don't go along with the norms or the crowds. And the word that keeps coming up in my mind is this word obedience, right? That
Mm,
I think a lot of us turn to at times because it's been so highlighted, especially in our faith. But I think it was Jennifer Finlayson Fife I heard talk about this once, that obedience is, it's not that we're against obedience, right? It's just a very immature and necessary at times. So it's a great shortcut though, right? So if
yeah.
I'm like starting a business, let's say, and I know nothing about business, then to listen to other people who have successfully run online businesses and just obey what they say and just give it a try because I don't have yet enough experience or development in my
Mhm,
business to be
mhm,
able to make my own
mhm.
decision. It makes sense that as a shortcut, I would follow their advice. I would be
Yep.
quote unquote obedient. And from there,
Mhm.
then I learn and then I develop my own opinion and
Yep.
I develop my own ways. And so that's really, I think, how obedience is designed, even with commandments in the the church and God's plan is like, here's some shortcuts. And as a child who doesn't know better, even, or
Yeah.
just in a certain area, maybe I don't have experience, but eventually develop your own sovereignty. Develop
Yeah.
your own sovereignty is the goal.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I wrestled so much, where I had that kind of lacerating, like cognitive dissonance with whether or not I should marry my husband. Because the obedient thing was we married someone in our faith in the temple.
Mm.
And had been my expectation. And so to feel that God was putting me on a different path was blowing my mind.
Because
And
it
so
didn't look like obedience, quote
it didn't look
unquote.
like obedience. And what
Yeah.
does that mean? Am I not obedient? Am I not faithful? Am I
Mm.
not who I thought I was? Like
Yeah.
all the things, right? And then I became really clear about this, and I've been so grateful for this. To me, obedience, I think of it as alignment with God. And alignment with God is different than aligning yourself with any sort of other external piece. And let's be
Mm.
clear, God is God. God is not even scripture. God is not temple. God is not church. Like all of these things are helpful things, but they are not God, right?
Mm.
They're tips and tools and practices and community and rights and covenants to even help us along that path, but they're not to be confused with God, right? There's a
Mm.
difference there.
Yeah.
And understanding that my allegiance, even obedience, alignment is with God, right? Is a very, very different thing than allegiance to the trappings, right? And those may be very vital trappings, but they're not the same thing. And we
Yeah.
need to be able to differentiate those as we're following personal revelation. To be a sovereign being, you have to trust your personal revelation, and that can be wacky and hard, right?
Yeah. So good. Well, I could talk to you all day about this, McArthur. I so appreciate your time. Where can people go to get what is your latest book that they should check out or a book
Yeah.
that would go along with this topic well?
The book I mentioned is called Change Makers: Women Who Boldly Built Zion, and it is available for pre-order on Amazon in December. The couples guide that I mentioned, In the Image of Our Heavenly Parents, in their image, is also now available on Amazon. So if you type
Okay.
in my name, McArthur Krishna, on Amazon, you'll get all the options,
All the books.
all the books, right? But I do highly recommend, if you're a person like me and I'm very pragmatic and I want to like this, like
Yeah.
I think the couples guide is really great because it actually gives you things that you can think about and tackle and do. It's not amorphous ideas. I don't do well with amorphous. Like I want to plan, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Give me
And
things to
so
do.
I think that's really great. And I learned by story. And so I love the Change Makers book because it was so inspiring as my daughters, I have 3 daughters, as my daughters have questions about their role in this world and specifically their role at church and how we play. And I think encouraging women to understand as we wrap up, like this is the big idea, right? That being a sovereign being is vitally important for who we are as an individual.
Mm.
And then being a sovereign being means how you play in community, right?
Mhm.
And that these women did things in creative, inspiring ways because they are following the direction they were led as sovereign beings. And I think that book about being a sovereign being in community and what good your sovereignty can do in the world is powerful.
Love it. Thank you so much, McArthur.
Awesome, awesome. Nice to be here.
Oh, wow. Look at that. You made it to the end. Your time and attention is valuable, and I don't take it lightly that you made it this far. In fact, it tells me you might be like me, insatiably curious about people and life and potential and connection. Maybe you have big dreams, but a small budget and no time. You're tired, but bored. You're content, but dissatisfied. Sound familiar? Come to a free coaching call and see for yourself what's possible. jodymoore.com/free coaching to register. That's jodymoore.com/free coaching.